This is Scott Craig, Public Policy Advisor for KLMP. Once again, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem is a focus of national attention for her recent veto of House Bill 1217 that she says she'll sign if the legislature amends it according to her recommendations. Now, House Bill 1217 is entitled An Act to Promote Continued Fairness in Women's Sports. In short, it is to make sure that biological females will only compete against biological females from kindergarten to college in the state of South Dakota. Now, her veto is perceived by the Family Research Council, Alliance Defending Freedom, Fox News' Tucker Carlson, and others, as caving in to pressure from the left that's been put on her not to sign the bill. The governor rejects that claim entirely, and she insists her actions are strategic and that she's actually working on a plan to protect fairness in women's sports in conjunction with other states. Several guests will join me during the program to share the perspectives of those that they represent in this matter, and they are Matt Sharp, Chief Counsel from Alliance Defending Freedom, Mark Miller, General Counsel for Governor Noem, and Norman Woods, Executive Director for the Family Heritage Alliance, which is South Dakota's Family Policy Council. But I'm ready to welcome the first of my guests today, and that is Matt Sharp. He is the Chief Counsel for Alliance Defending Freedom. Matt, welcome back.
Thanks for having me on.
Matt, can you tell us ADF's concerns over the governor's veto of HB 1217?
Yeah, ADF, we've been involved in this issue across the country and representing student female athletes that are standing for fairness in sports. And so one of the things that the past version of HB 1217 does is that it does protect fairness in women's sports from kindergarten all the way to college. And so one of our main concerns with Governor Noem's style-informed veto is that it removes the protections for college athletes. And so we end up with a girl that is, a rising track and field star. She does great in high school, and a couple months later when she enrolls in college in South Dakota, she finds herself being forced to compete against a biological male, and she has no protection. And to me, that's just fundamentally unfair, but it's also legally concerning because if we're looking at this and the court's looking at it and saying, hey, South Dakota, if you're concerned about protecting women's sports, why did you do it for high school girls but not college girls? And so we really want to see those comprehensive protections, one, because it matters to female athletes, including athletes that we're representing in Idaho and in other states, but also, two, because it is more legally sound to have a uniform protection for female athletics from kindergarten to college. So that's our first big concern with the governor's veto. I think the second one goes to entirely removing the cause of action or the ability of a female athlete to get relief if her rights are violated. Let's say a school ignores this law and says, hey, we don't care. We think guys ought to be allowed to compete on a girl's team if that guy identifies as a girl. Well, what's a female athlete to do if she loses a spot on the team or gets kicked off the podium? We want her to be able to go to court and say, hey, judge, can you issue an order telling this school to follow the law? Well, because that section of HB 1217 was removed, girls have no legal relief. And we've actually seen how that's played out in one of our cases in Connecticut, where we're almost 2 years into the lawsuit, and the girls are still fighting for the ability to even be in court. The other side's trying to dismiss it and say, hey, you can't file a lawsuit here. So we want to make sure that girls have not only protection from kindergarten to college, but also have a meaningful way that if the school ignores this and knowingly allows a guy to participate on a girl's team, that a girl can get judicial relief and get a court order telling the school to stop.
Thank you for sharing ADF's position on this, and thank you for all the work that you do across the nation and for being on the program with me again.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Scott.
Okay, that was Matt Sharp, Chief Counsel for Alliance Defending Freedom. Well, joining me next in the program is Norman Woods. He's the Executive Director of the State Family Policy Council here in South Dakota called the Family Heritage Alliance. He's been on the program a number of times. Welcome back, Norman.
Hey, glad to be on, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Now, I'm aware that there are people who understand the governor's recommendations as a way to tell the legislature they're asking for a little too much too soon, and that this is one of those issues that you only win incrementally.
Right. So I can definitely understand the sentiment of those who would say, let's take a compromise when it still means we can move the needle and have a win. And if that's what we were dealing with here, we would definitely be open to looking at a good compromise. But honestly, that doesn't really matter because what she's doing is unconstitutional in the first place. So Article 4, Section 4 of the South Dakota Constitution says that bills with error in form or style may be returned to the legislature with recommendations from the governor. So what she's doing is using a mechanism that's supposed to be used for correcting grammatical errors, or the wrong statute is mentioned and we need to fix a number, or something like that. And that's actually been used about 89 times in South Dakota, just fixing grammatical errors in form or style. She's using that mechanism to cut out approximately half of the bill's language and add a little bit of language as well, which is a huge overreach. And honestly, it's a bit of a power grab on the part of the executive branch, because governors don't get to amend bills. They don't get to change bills. They get to either sign them or veto them. And so even if this was a compromise that we said, hey, we can live with this, it moves the football down or it moves the needle, whichever analogy you want to use. Even if it was a decent compromise that we could live with, it's still an unconstitutional action that she's using to try and get us there.
Well, thank you for sharing your perspective. It sure helps us understand the significance of the governor's veto.
Hey, we're just glad to be part of a team. And thanks for having me on, Scott.
Again, that was Norman Woods, the executive director of the Family Heritage Alliance, South Dakota's State Family Policy Council. And this is Scott Craig. And joining me now is the General Counsel for Governor Kristi Noem, and that is Mark Miller. Mark, welcome to Behind the Curtain.
Thank you, Pastor Craig. Pleasure to join you.
Well, right now there's tremendous confusion over the veto of the governor. What I'd like to do first is ask you if you can share the governor's rationale for the veto after saying she was excited to sign it as is.
Thank you for that question, Pastor Craig, and that's an excellent question. And I think the number one thing to emphasize here is that everyone that's discussing this bill on the conservative side of the aisle wants the same thing. We want to protect fairness in girls' sports. And so the governor's message in saying she wanted to sign House Bill 1217 is no different then when she said it and when she tweeted it than it is now, which is 1217 needs to be signed. She's made some proposed revisions. She didn't veto it. If she vetoed it, it would be over. But in fact, the ball is now back in the legislator's court. She said to make sure 1217 is defensible in court, let's make a few what's called style and form revisions, which is within the state constitution, and the legislature approves it, and then we go to court, and we'll be ready to be in court and be in a much stronger position to protect fairness in girls' sports, which is what we're all trying to do.
And if I understand correctly, the governor has expressed that her recommendations were only to strengthen the bill, make it more constitutional. Now, she's been describing like a strategy that she wants to use, a strategy that's not found in HB 1217, but something that's found outside of it in a coalition of like-minded states.
So I think you're exactly right when you started out, Pastor, with the word strategy, because we all agree on the same goal, to protect fairness in women's sports. And so it was just a question of strategy and say, tactics to achieve that end. And the idea is we're talking about two different levels. You're talking about the legal fight and you're talking about the economic fight. And by creating Defend Title IX now, if you get enough states that have more leverage than, say, South Dakota does economically, like, say, Florida, like, say, Texas, the red states, that the NCAA cannot be in a position to boycott and be taken seriously, then we win in the court of public opinion. Then we change the nature of the political discussion such that the courts become less important.
Yeah, we can all hope for that. Well, Mark, I want to thank you for being on the program today and for sharing the perspective of the governor in this.
Thank you, Pastor. Anytime.
Okay, that was Mark Miller, General Counsel for Governor Kristi Noem. And as you all should know, Monday, this is all in the hands of the state legislature. And they've got three options. They can concur with the governor's recommendations and send it back to her desk. She'll sign it. They might come up with something actually entirely new that can do that. Or they may simply decide to override the governor's veto if they have enough votes. And your duty as an American citizen is to let your will be known to your local legislators. You have 2 representatives and 1 senator in your district. And you can contact them to tell them if you want them to override the veto or go with the recommendation of the governor. And you can find their contact information online at legislature.sd.gov. Again, legislature.sd.gov. Legislature.sd.gov. For KLMP, this is Scott Craig, Public Policy Advisor.